I found the boy hanging from the canyon bridge at dawn, barely alive, with thief carved into his back. The men who did this called it frontier justice. I called it murder. They didn't know the boy was my son. The son I'd abandoned 15 years ago to chase gold and glory. Now I had 1 week to save him from the noose, clear his name, and face the men who wore badges but had blood on their hands darker than any outlaws. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. The canyon town of Redemption Gulch clung to the cliffside like a desperate prayer. Its wooden buildings perched on rock ledges overlooking a gorge so deep that men said you could throw your sins into it and never hear them hit bottom. The morning sun hadn't yet reached the bottom of the canyon when Thomas Garrett rode in, his horse's hooves echoing against stone walls that had witnessed 15 years of his absence. He was a ghost returning to haunt the living. The last time anyone in Redemption Gulch had seen Thomas Garrett, he'd been a young father with calloused hands and humble dreams, working the copper mine that had made this town possible. But copper prices had fallen, dreams had withered like desert flowers, and Thomas had made a choice that carved itself into his soul deeper than any pickaxe could cut stone. He'd left his wife Sarah and their infant son Daniel behind, chasing rumors of silver strikes in Nevada that promised wealth beyond imagination. The silver had been real. Thomas had struck it rich within 2 years, amassing a fortune that should have brought joy but instead brought only hollow satisfaction. He told himself he would return once he'd made enough to give his family everything they deserved. But months became years, and years became a chasm wider than any canyon. Sarah's letters had stopped coming after the 5th year. Thomas had told himself it was for the best, that she'd moved on, found happiness, forgotten the man who'd abandoned her for metal in the ground. Now, at 43, Thomas Garrett rode through streets he barely recognized, past buildings that had grown taller and more prosperous during his absence. The mine had survived its lean years and now thrived under new management. The town had expanded, swallowing the wild canyon edges with civilization's hunger. But Thomas noticed none of this prosperity. His eyes were fixed on the wooden bridge spanning the narrowest part of the gorge, the bridge where, according to the telegram that had found him in Carson City 3 days ago, they had hanged a boy for theft, not hanged to death. That would come later, after a trial the telegram assured him would be swift and fair. But they'd strung the boy up as a warning, left him dangling until consciousness fled and life nearly followed. When they'd cut him down, they'd carved thief into his back with a hunting knife, ensuring the scar would mark him forever as a criminal. The boy's name was Daniel Garrett. He was 15 years old, and Thomas had not seen his son since the day he'd ridden away from a crying infant and a devastated wife. Thomas dismounted near the sheriff's office, his expensive boots, crafted from the finest leather his silver fortune could buy, touching dirt that held memories of poverty and shame. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd left this place to escape being poor, and now he'd returned with wealth that felt worthless against the weight of what he'd lost. Sheriff Marcus Hollis stepped onto the wooden porch, his badge catching the early morning light. Marcus had aged, gray had invaded his beard, lines had deepened around his eyes, but Thomas recognized him immediately. They'd worked the mines together once, before Thomas's ambition had driven him away and Marcus's sense of duty had driven him toward the law. Thomas Garrett. Marcus's voice carried no warmth, only acknowledgement flat as a judge's gavel. Didn't think I'd see you again in this lifetime. Where's my son? Thomas asked, his voice rough from 3 days of hard riding and harder thoughts. Marcus's jaw tightened. In a cell, where he belongs until trial. He's 15 years old, Marcus. Old enough to know stealing's wrong. Marcus descended the steps slowly, his hand resting near his gun belt, not threatening, but aware. Old enough to break into the mine office and crack the safe. Old enough to make off with $3,000 in payroll money. Thomas felt his chest constrict. He's just a boy. A boy who cost 40 miners their wages. A boy who would have gotten away with it if he hadn't bragged about it in the saloon. Marcus's eyes hardened. Your boy, Thomas. The one you left behind to rot while you went chasing silver. Sarah did her best, but a woman alone in a mining town. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The words hit Thomas like physical blows. Each one carved Gil deeper into the space where his heart should have been. I want to see him. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Follow me. But I'm warning you, Thomas. He doesn't want to see you. Far as Daniel's concerned, he doesn't have a father. Just a name on a gravestone that was never filled because you were too busy to die proper. The jail was small, designed for drunks and petty criminals, not for boys who should have been learning trades and courting girls instead of facing a hangman's noose. Daniel sat on a wooden bench in the corner cell, his back to the bars, a bandage wrapped around his torso where the knife had carved its judgment. When Thomas approached, the boy didn't turn, but Thomas could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched into fists against his knees. Daniel. The name caught in Thomas's throat, tangled with 15 years of absence and regret. Go away. The voice was young but hard, aged beyond its years by bitterness and pain. I don't need another visitor telling me I'm going to hell. I'm not a visitor. I know who you are. Daniel turned then, and Thomas saw his son's face for the first time since infancy. The boy had Sarah's eyes, green as canyon moss after rain, but the shape of his face, the set of his jaw, those were Thomas's own features reflected back at him like a mirror built from abandonment and consequence. You're the man who left. The man Ma cried about for years before she stopped crying altogether. The man whose name she wouldn't speak even when she was dying. The words landed like bullets, each one finding its mark with precision. Your mother, when did she? 2 years ago. Fever. Doc said it was consumption, but I know better. Daniel's eyes blazed with anger that burned hotter than any forge. She died of a broken heart. She died because you left her with nothing but shame and a baby she had to raise alone, while the whole town whispered behind her back about the fool woman who'd been abandoned. Thomas gripped the cell bars, his knuckles white. I sent money. Every month I sent. Money. Daniel laughed, a bitter sound that echoed against stone walls. You think money fixes what you did. You think gold makes up for bedtime stories, for teaching a boy to ride, for being there when Ma got sick. He stood abruptly, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded back. I don't want your money. I don't want your guilt. I just want you to leave, so I can die knowing the last thing I did was spit on your memory. You're not going to die. Thomas's voice came out stronger than he felt. I'm going to prove you're innocent. Daniel's laugh was even more bitter this time. I'm not innocent. I did it. I stole that money. He moved closer to the bars, close enough that Thomas could see the tears threatening at the corners of those green eyes. I stole it because I wanted to hurt them the way they hurt Ma. The mine owners who paid her pennies for washing their clothes. The merchants who extended credit then humiliated her when she couldn't pay. The whole damn town that treated us like garbage because you left us. His voice dropped to a whisper. I stole it and I'm glad. The only thing I regret is getting caught before I could burn the whole town down. Marcus had been standing silent in the doorway, but now he spoke. That's enough, Daniel. You've said your piece. He turned to Thomas. You've seen him. Now leave. Trial's in 4 days, and there's nothing you can do to change what's coming. But Thomas Garrett had not ridden 3 days through desert and canyon to walk away. He'd spent 15 years running from responsibility, from consequence, from the family he'd failed. Not anymore. I'm not leaving, Thomas said, his voice carrying a certainty he hadn't felt in years. I'm staying until I find out who really robbed that safe. Because I know my son, Marcus. Even a son I don't deserve. And I know that a boy who stayed loyal to his dying mother's memory wouldn't brag about theft in a saloon. Someone set him up. Someone wanted him to hang. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, surprise breaking through the armor of his anger. Marcus shook his head. You're chasing ghosts, Thomas. Maybe. Thomas replied. "But I've been a ghost for 15 years. It's time I started haunting the living." As Thomas left the jail, the morning sun finally reached the bottom of the canyon, illuminating Redemption Gulch in harsh, unforgiving light. He had 4 days to save his son from the noose. 4 days to uncover a conspiracy in a town that had learned to hide its sins in the shadows of the gorge. 4 days to prove that some debts could never be paid with silver, only with blood and redemption. Thomas Garrett's first stop was the mine office, a sturdy stone building perched on the canyon's edge where the company kept its records and stored payroll before distribution. The robbery had happened here 3 nights ago, according to the official report. The safe had been cracked by someone who knew their way around locks, and the money, $3,000 in mixed bills and coin, had vanished along with any hope 40 miners had of feeding their families that week. The door was unlocked, which struck Thomas as the first oddity. A business that had just been robbed should have been sealed tighter than a miser's purse. Inside, the office smelled of tobacco smoke and old paper, dust motes dancing in shafts of sunlight that cut through windows overlooking the gorge's deadly drop. Silas Drummond sat behind a mahogany desk that cost more than most miners made in a year, his round face glistening with sweat despite the morning cool. Silas had been the mine's bookkeeper when Thomas worked here, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers and a talent for making numbers dance on ledger pages. Now he wore the title of assistant mine manager, though everyone knew the real power belonged to Nathaniel Blackwood, the owner who'd bought the operation during the lean years and transformed it into the canyon's primary source of wealth. Thomas Garrett. Silas's voice quavered slightly, his fingers fidgeting with a pen. "Heard you were back in town. Come to see the scene of your boy's crime." Thomas ignored the barb, his eyes scanning the room. The safe stood in the corner, its door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Scratch marks around the lock suggested forced entry, but something about the pattern struck Thomas as wrong. He'd seen plenty of safe cracking in his mining days. Desperate men did desperate things during lean times, and the marks looked too clean, too deliberate, as if someone had wanted to make it obvious the safe had been forced. "Tell me what happened," Thomas said, moving closer to examine the safe. Silas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Nothing to tell. Daniel came in through the back window some time after midnight, cracked the safe, took the money, left through the same window. We found his knife at the scene, the one with his initials carved in the handle. Open and shut." "Too open and shut," Thomas murmured, running his fingers along the safe's edge. "Where was the night watchman?" "Jeremiah? He was making his rounds. Can't be everywhere at once." "Convenient." Thomas turned to face Silas, noting the sheen of sweat had intensified. "My son is 15 years old. Where would he learn to crack a safe like this?" Silas's laugh was nervous, unconvincing. Maybe he's naturally talented. Or maybe he's been planning this longer than anyone knew. "Your boy's got a reputation, Thomas. He's been in trouble before. Fights, theft, vandalism. The whole town knows he blames us for his mother's death." The mention of Sarah sent a spike of pain through Thomas's chest, but he forced himself to focus. "Show me the ledgers." "What?" "The accounting books. I want to see the payroll records for the past 6 months." Silas's face paled. "I don't have authorization to." "Then get authorization." Thomas's voice carried an edge honed by 15 years of negotiations in rough mining camps. "Or I'll go to Nathaniel Blackwood myself and explain why his assistant mine manager is obstructing an investigation into a robbery that cost him $3,000. The threat worked. Silas fumbled with the key ring, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew a leather-bound ledger with trembling hands. "Here, but you won't find anything. The books are clean." Thomas opened the ledger, his eyes scanning columns of numbers with the practiced ease of a man who'd managed his own successful mining operations. At first glance, everything appeared legitimate: wages paid, supplies purchased, equipment maintained. But Thomas had learned long ago that the truth in accounting rarely lived on the surface. It hid in the margins, in the inconsistencies between what was recorded and what actually happened. He found the first discrepancy within minutes. A payment to a supply company called Desert Freight and Transport for $2,000, dated 6 weeks ago. The notation claimed it was for mining equipment and timber supports. But Thomas knew the canyon mines intimately. The equipment they used, the suppliers they favored. Desert Freight and Transport wasn't a name he recognized. "What's this company?" Thomas asked, pointing to the entry. Silas barely glanced at it. "New supplier. Better prices than the old outfit." "And the equipment they delivered, where is it?" "Down the mine, I suppose. I don't oversee every shipment personally." Thomas flipped back through the pages, finding more entries for Desert Freight and Transport. $1,500 here, $3,000 there, all within the past 4 months. The amounts were substantial, but not excessive enough to raise immediate alarm. Spread across months of legitimate expenses, they blended into the noise of normal operations. Unless you were looking for them specifically. These payments total nearly $10,000, Thomas said slowly. "That's a significant amount for a new supplier." "Mining's expensive." Silas's voice had risen an octave. "You know that better than anyone." Thomas closed the ledger, his mind working through possibilities. A fake supplier could be a way to embezzle funds, create invoices for goods never delivered, pocket the money, and hide the theft in plain sight among legitimate expenses. But what did this have to do with Daniel's alleged robbery? Unless the robbery was a distraction, a way to cover larger thefts by blaming a desperate boy with a motive. "I need to talk to the miners," Thomas said. "The ones who didn't get paid." "They're working. Can't interrupt the shift." "Then I'll wait for the shift change." Thomas moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Silas. The night watchman, where can I find Jeremiah?" "He quit. Left town the day after the robbery." The second oddity in a growing list. Thomas nodded slowly, filing the information away. Interesting timing. Outside, the canyon town bustled with midday activity. Women hung laundry on lines stretched between buildings. Children played in the dusty streets, and the constant rhythmic pounding of the stamp mill echoed against stone walls as it crushed ore into powder. To any casual observer, Redemption Gulch looked like a thriving frontier settlement, prosperous and orderly. But Thomas saw the cracks now. The miners gathered outside the saloon weren't celebrating payday. They were drowning their anger over lost wages. The merchants wore strained expressions as they calculated how delayed payments would affect their own survival. And everywhere, people whispered about the Garrett boy, about justice and thieves, and the hanging that would set things right. Thomas found a bench outside the general store and waited for the mine whistle that would signal the end of the shift. He had questions that needed answers, and miners who'd been robbed of their wages would be motivated to provide them. The sun climbed higher, baking the canyon town in heat that shimmered off rock and wood. Thomas watched Sheriff Marcus make his rounds, nodding to townspeople who greeted him with respect. Marcus Hollis had always been an honest man, as far as Thomas knew. But honest men could be manipulated, especially when the evidence against an accused criminal appeared overwhelming. An hour before the shift change, a shadow fell across Thomas's bench. He looked up to find a woman standing before him, her face lined by sun and hardship, her dress faded but clean. She held a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and her eyes, hard and suspicious, fixed on him with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "You're him," she said. "Not a question. Sarah's husband who left her to starve." Thomas stood slowly. "I sent money every month. Money we never saw." The woman's voice carried the sharp edge of old anger. "I'm Martha Brennan. I was Sarah's friend when she had no one else. I held her hand when she died, whispering your name even though you didn't deserve the breath it took to say it." The words cut deep, but Thomas forced himself to meet her gaze. "I failed her. I know that. But I'm here now to save our son. Your son is a thief. My son is a scapegoat." Thomas gestured toward the mine office. "Someone's been embezzling from that company for months. Thousands of dollars hidden in fake invoices. Daniel's robbery is too convenient, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. He's being sacrificed to hide someone else's crimes." Martha's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of doubt, perhaps, or hope. "You can prove this." "I'm going to try." Thomas paused. Did Sarah ever mention anyone at the mine company who might have? She mentioned Nathaniel Blackwood. Martha's voice dropped lower. "The mine owner. He visited her sometimes, brought food and medicine when she was sick, acted like a kind benefactor." Her mouth twisted, but Sarah was afraid of him. She never said why, but I could see it in how she flinched when his name came up. Whatever kindness he showed had strings attached. A chill ran down Thomas's spine despite the heat. "Did she tell you anything specific?" "Only that she'd seen something. Something in the mine office ledgers when she was cleaning there one night. She couldn't read well, couldn't make sense of all the numbers, but she knew something was wrong." Martha's hands tightened on the basket handle. A week later, Nathaniel visited her. Told her she didn't need to clean the office anymore, that he was giving her a different job with better pay. But Sarah knew it was a warning. Stay quiet about what you saw, or suffer the consequences. And she stayed quiet. Thomas said softly. She had a son to protect. Martha's eyes blazed. A son whose father had abandoned him. She did what she had to do to survive. She thrust the basket toward Thomas. "This is food for Daniel. Prison meals aren't fit for dogs. You make sure he gets it." Thomas took the basket, feeling the weight of more than just bread and cheese. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just save that boy." Martha turned to leave, then paused. "Sarah loved you until the day she died, Thomas Garrett. I never understood why. But maybe if you can prove Daniel's innocence, maybe if you can make something right in this town that's built on lies and blood money, maybe then I'll understand what she saw in you." She walked away, leaving Thomas holding a basket of food and a growing conviction that the corruption in Redemption Gulch ran deeper than embezzlement. It ran all the way to the top, to a mine owner who silenced those who discovered his secrets. And Thomas's son had become the latest sacrifice to protect those secrets. The mine whistle blew, its piercing shriek echoing through the canyon. Miners emerged from the shaft entrance like ants from a disturbed hill, their faces black with dust, their bodies exhausted from 10 hours of brutal labor. Thomas moved toward them, ready to ask questions that might get him killed. But he'd spent 15 years running from danger and consequence. Not anymore. Not when his son's life hung in the balance. The miners gathered outside the saloon like a jury waiting to pass judgment, their faces carved from canyon rock and hard experience. They'd worked a shift without pay, breaking stone and hauling or for wages that had been stolen, and their anger simmered just beneath the surface like magma waiting to erupt. Thomas approached carefully, aware that he was an outsider now despite having once swung a pickaxe alongside these men. 15 years of absence had erased any goodwill he might have earned in the past. To them, he was just another rich man in expensive boots, father to the thief who'd stolen their livelihoods. "I'm looking for information about the robbery," Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the crowd. "I'll pay for anyone's drinks if you'll answer my questions honestly." A murmur rippled through the group. Free whiskey was currency worth more than promises in a mining town. A grizzled man with a scar across his cheek stepped forward. "Name's Porter. I'll talk, but it won't change nothing. Your boy's guilty, and we all know it." Thomas signaled the bartender to pour drinks. "Tell me what you know." Porter downed his whiskey in one swallow before speaking. "Night of the robbery, I was working late shift. We just finished blasting a new shaft, and I came up around midnight to log the progress. Saw someone running from the mine office. Small figure, could have been a boy. By the time I raised the alarm, he was gone." "Did you see his face?" "Too dark. But Sheriff found Daniel's knife at the scene next morning. That carving knife with his initials, the one Sarah gave him before she died. Doesn't take a detective to put that together." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. The knife was damning evidence, but something about the story felt wrong. Daniel would never leave that knife behind. It was his most precious possession. Maybe he dropped it while running. Maybe guilt made him careless. Porter shrugged. Either way, The boy bragged about it next day in this very saloon. Told anyone who'd listen that he'd robbed the mine to get revenge for what they did to his ma. Drunk as a skunk and proud of it. This matched what Marcus had told him, but Thomas knew his son well enough, or thought he did, to recognize that something didn't fit. Daniel was angry, yes, bitter and damaged by abandonment and loss, but bragging about a crime that would get him hanged, that spoke of either stupidity or someone else's words put in his mouth. Who heard him bragging? Thomas asked. Another miner spoke up. I did. He was standing right here, waving money around, buying drinks for anyone who'd take them. Said he'd hit the mine where it hurt and planned to do worse. What kind of money? Bills or coins? The miner frowned, thinking. Bills mostly. 20s and 50s. Thomas filed the detail away. The stolen payroll had been a mix of currency, but the mine typically paid workers in smaller denominations, 1s, 5s, 10s at most. 20s and 50s were what the mine used for larger transactions, equipment purchases, and executive expenses. Not the kind of money a 15-year-old boy would logically have from cracking a payroll safe. Did anyone see where Daniel went after he left the saloon? Sheriff arrested him an hour later. Found him passed out drunk in an alley behind the general store. Porter signaled for another drink. Look, mister, I know you want to believe your boy's innocent, but the evidence is clear as canyon water. He did it. He admitted it. And now he's got to pay for it. Thomas scanned the crowd of miners, noting the hardness in their eyes. These were men who'd lost wages they couldn't afford to lose, men with families to feed and debts to pay. They wanted someone to blame, someone to punish. Daniel had given them both, but Thomas saw something else beneath the anger, fear. These men were afraid, and that fear manifested as certainty about Daniel's guilt. Because if Daniel wasn't the thief, if the real criminal remained free and hidden among them, then no one was safe. What about the night watchman? Thomas asked. Jeremiah, where can I find him? The miners exchanged glances. Finally, Porter spoke. Jeremiah left town the morning after the robbery, took his wages and disappeared. Sheriff said he couldn't handle the guilt of failing his duty. Convenient timing for him to quit. Convenient or not, he's gone. Trail goes cold there. Thomas thanked the miners and paid for their drinks as promised. As he turned to leave the saloon, a hand gripped his arm. He looked down to find an older miner, bent with years of hard labor, his eyes clouded with cataracts but still sharp with intelligence. You're asking the wrong questions, the old man whispered. You want to know who set up your boy? Ask yourself who benefits most from him hanging. The real thief benefits, Thomas replied quietly. The old man shook his head. Bigger than that. Think about who gains when a troublesome boy disappears. Think about who Sarah might have told before she died. Think about secrets buried deeper than any mine shaft. Before Thomas could press for more information, the old man shuffled away, leaving behind more questions than answers. Thomas made his way back to the jail as afternoon shadows began their slow crawl across the canyon. He found Daniel sitting exactly as before, his back rigid against the pain of his carved wounds, his eyes staring at nothing. I brought you food, Thomas said, passing the basket through the bars. From Martha Brennan. She was your mother's friend. Daniel took the basket mechanically, his face expressionless. I had a lot of friends after you left, people who actually cared whether we lived or died. I know I can't make up for what I did, Thomas said carefully, but I can try to save you from the noose. I just need you to tell me the truth about that night. I already told you the truth. I robbed the safe. Did you? Or did someone give you money and convince you to claim credit for the robbery? Thomas leaned closer to the bars. The bills you were waving around in the saloon, those were large denominations, the kind of money that doesn't come from a payroll safe. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Daniel's face. I don't remember much about that night. I was drunk. You're 15 years old. Who bought you that much liquor? Daniel's hands clenched into fists. A man. I don't know his name. He found me after the robbery, said he heard what I'd done and wanted to celebrate with me. Kept pouring drinks, kept telling me I was brave for standing up to the mine owners. His voice dropped. Next thing I remember, Sheriff was hauling me out of an alley. This man, what did he look like? Big, well-dressed, wore a ring with a black stone. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. He said Ma would be proud of me for making them pay. He knew things about her, about how she died. I thought he was just another miner who'd known her. Thomas felt ice form in his veins. A well-dressed man with a black stone ring who knew about Sarah. That described only one person in Redemption Gulch, Nathaniel Blackwood, the mine owner. Daniel, I need you to think very carefully. Did this man give you the money before or after you claimed credit for the robbery? Daniel's face paled as memory struggled through the fog of alcohol. Before, he gave me the money and told me to go to the saloon. Told me to tell everyone I'd robbed the mine. Said it would make me a legend. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture darker than Thomas had imagined. Daniel hadn't robbed the safe. He'd been set up as a scapegoat by the actual thief. And that thief was powerful enough to manipulate a 15-year-old boy, frame him for embezzlement, and ensure he'd hang before anyone could investigate too deeply. Why would Blackwood want you to hang? Thomas asked, more to himself than to Daniel. Because Ma knew something. Daniel's voice trembled. The week before she died, she told me that if anything happened to her, I should find her journal. She'd written down everything she'd seen in the mine office. Numbers that didn't add up, payments to companies that didn't exist. She said it was insurance, in case Blackwood ever tried to silence her. Where is this journal? Hidden in our old cabin, under a loose floorboard in her bedroom. Daniel's eyes met Thomas's, and for the first time, the boy's armor of anger cracked. She made me promise never to tell anyone unless she died. And when she did die, I thought about using that journal to destroy Blackwood, but I was afraid. Afraid they'd hurt me like they might have hurt her. You think Blackwood killed your mother? Doc said it was consumption, but Ma was healthy 1 month and dead the next. And Blackwood visited her right before she got sick. Brought her tea he said would help with her cough. Daniel's voice broke. I should have protected her. Should have stopped him. But I was just a kid, and I was scared. Thomas gripped the bars so hard his knuckles turned white. If Blackwood had poisoned Sarah to keep her quiet about his embezzlement, then framing Daniel for robbery served two purposes. It eliminated the last person who knew about the journal, and it provided cover for more large-scale thefts blamed on a dead boy. I'm going to get that journal, Thomas said with quiet intensity, and I'm going to use it to bury Nathaniel Blackwood so deep he'll never see daylight again. You can't. Daniel's eyes widened with fear. Blackwood owns this town. He owns the sheriff, the judge, everyone. They'll kill you before you can expose him. Maybe, Thomas acknowledged, but I've spent 15 years being a coward, running from responsibility and consequence. Not anymore. If I die trying to save you, at least I'll die as the father I should have been all along. For a moment, father and son looked at each other across iron bars and 15 years of abandonment. Then Daniel spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Ma used to tell me you'd come back, that you'd ride in like a hero and save us from everything bad in the world. Tears tracked through the grime on his face. I stopped believing her after she died, but maybe she was right. Thomas felt his own eyes burning. I'm no hero, Daniel, but I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until you're free. As Thomas left the jail, the sun was sitting behind the canyon walls, painting the gorge in shades of blood and fire. He had 3 days until the trial. 3 days to find a journal hidden in an old cabin, expose a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the town's power structure, and survive long enough to present the evidence. The odds were against him, but Thomas Garrett had struck silver when everyone said it was impossible. He'd built a fortune from nothing, and now he would tear down an empire of lies to save the son he'd failed for far too long. Thomas left the jail as darkness fell over the canyon, his mind racing with one thought: find the journal before Blackwood's men find him. He had 72 hours until the trial, and a deadly enemy who would stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried. The hunt was about to begin. But the story isn't over. Not yet. The hardest trials still lie ahead. The truth still waits to be revealed. And when everything comes to a head, what will happen to our heroes? Part 2 holds all the answers. Don't miss the continuation.